Good morning, everybody. I hope you're here to learn about enrollment. We have a panel discussion here about acing enrollment, hosted by Jennifer Unger.
All right. Good morning. I hope you guys are as awake as we are, which is only a little. Before we get started, I'm going to ask the panelists to go ahead and introduce themselves so you have an idea of who you'll be listening to this morning.
I'm Dustin Letkeman, and I'm from Greater Saskatoon Catholic Schools in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada. We have a unique environment in some ways. We have iPads that we host on a different MDM, but we have about 700 Mac OS devices that we use with Jamf Pro. And I've been tasked to set that up from the ground up, fortunately, and so I'm very familiar with all the aspects thereof. And I've been doing it for the last year, and from the MDM that we switched from, I've been very happy with Jamf Pro. It's made our life so much easier, and it's the support that we've received from the Jamf Nation has been incredible, and from the Jamf support, it's been great as well.
I'm Dave Cedar. I come from a company called SHI. We're a software hardware reseller. So it's I like to provide a little bit of a different kind of perspective because we're usually not in kind of one environment. We're going to be in 20, 30 different customers, helping them out in different ways. So we have kind of a unique perspective of really getting to know a lot of the enterprises that are out there and how they're deploying and really provide that assistance among that. I'm also an old school Mac guy since '89. And Jamf has been probably one of the most fun things I've ever had that keeps me very busy. So it's really great to be here.
I'm Ross Darenko. I'm originally from Ping, so I spent 7 years there and just recently moved over to Twitter. So I went from an environment of about 1,000 Macs to 4,600. And it was zero touch there, and it's a bit different at Twitter, but I don't think I can talk about that process fully.
My name is Millie Marsh. I am the Mac admin for a company called CTS. We're a vendor. Our client makes toys. My views are my own and don't represent the company or employers or clients that I work for. Our environment has about 1,200 Macs, about 100 Apple TVs, about close to 15,000 iOS devices. They're used in many different ways. Unfortunately, I don't manage all of the iOS devices, but we're working through that. I inherited my environment like many of us have. And before this, I was at a large entertainment company for about 9 years. They have parks and resorts and make movies. So I have a lot of experience and insight from that environment.
Thank you. So this morning we're going to be talking about acing enrollment, and specifically we're talking about using applications and workflows such as DEP Notify, SplashBuddy, the Mac at IBM apps, lots of open source tools that are available to help your user experience and your setup experience. So I'm going to start with a couple of questions for the panel, and then we will take questions from the audience as well if you have any questions about the tools, any questions about what they're using, or any recommendations. So my first question would be why? Why are we looking to show the users what we're doing, given the insight into the enrollment process?
Yeah, so the reason why, of course, is to enable the users and to make it easier on IT as well. If you can have a tool that you can implement that you don't have to click install, or to enter a bunch of information in a hack job way, it certainly makes it easier on us as IT if you can just have a screen that shows up, answers exact questions that you need. kicks off a process for provisioning that device, imaging that device in the way that you want it to be done, that is very empowering. And it saves time, saves budget, saves money. That's the reason why we do that.
I'll also. Oh, sorry. I'll also add as a small anecdote from many years ago. A certain the fruit stand, as some ex-employees know it, we used to have to re-image our machines manually, and there was a lengthy process. And there would be a big screen on the front that said "Restore and process, do not disturb." And we'd put a big piece of acrylic on top of the keyboard that said, "Please do not disturb." And the first thing that absolutely everyone did was take that acrylic off and try to get around that screen. So to be able to get things ready for someone, not only by just saying something's going on, but actually informing them of what it is, can really go a long way of okay, I don't know when this is going to be done, versus, okay, something's actually happening that's meaningful, and I really shouldn't try to get around it right now.
I think the why also is the trust thing. It's like telling the user what's happening. It's also bringing them into your environment. A lot of the times your enrollment is their first touch on that machine. But there is that complex problem of time, right? So how long is that enrollment going to take? Can you do it really fast? Can you do things like deploy Office after the fact? So when they actually get their computer, it's like there's they open the Office door. It says, well, where's Office? It's like, well, it's coming. We wanted you to get your machine faster. So I think that plays a big part in it. And a lot of companies try and aim for a more transparent model, so just giving that user the information of what's actually happening. The technical users will appreciate it. The users that really don't understand it aren't going to question it. They're just going to go, okay, they're doing something on my machine, cool.
I think the why is also a lot to do with first impressions. Not just first impressions with the end user, first impressions with your IT staff, first impressions with people who are not necessarily doing your back-end engineering. You want to let them know, depending on the audience, what's happening, or you might want to entertain them, or you might want to inform them about HR policies. There's any number of things. I'm in a unique position since my environment is inherited, that I have now the opportunity to look at all the different options and see what's going to be appropriate. Eventually, I would like to get to a point where I can just drop ship a device, have that step 1, step 2, no step 3 experience. We're already having that experience with Apple TVs, and it's very exciting because the executive gets their new little Apple TV, they literally plug it in and it's working with their apps that they've been assigned and all of that. So yeah, first impressions.
So the obvious follow-up, I think, here is how are you doing this? Now that we know why we want to do it, what we want to do, how do we do it?
It's a loaded question.
Well, how are you doing it?
Well, number one, just to harken back to the why. I love the progress bar that's like 100% for 5 minutes or 10 minutes or an hour. So maybe the classic Microsoft one, right? File copy. How we're doing that at Grace Tuscan Catholic Schools, we use DEP Notify. And I'm not you can use DEP Notify just as it is if you're really good at scripting. I'm not a pro at scripting. I know, like, I went to college. I did computer science and didn't really like just sitting in a chair just coding all day. So I don't know if any of you guys are like that, but I see some nods in the audience. But I can look at code and I can kind of put 2 and 2 together. There's a really handy tool called DEP Notify Starter. It was called something else before. I think it was DEP Notify for Jamf or something to that effect, and then they changed the name. And it's a really handy tool. So I mean, if you are looking for a tool that just does the job, and you don't have, and you're not very confident in and looking at DEP Notify and just making all those scripts and to kick that off, or you look at that and it's like a bunch of jargon. DEP Notify Starter is a really handy tool. It's a bash script that is just basically a template and it's really well documented, like right in the script itself. If you can just read a web page and just the blanks, fill in the blanks, you can use that tool. It's again very well documented. Just do a Google search for DEP Notify Starter. On that page itself, it has links to DEP Notify, and we use that to basically answer all the questions that our users need to answer, and then kick off those policies, those installs, that provisioning, that imaging for the users, and it just makes life simple for the user. If you want to do zero touch, you can use that for that. But also too, if you don't want to trust your users quite yet, which we don't want to quite yet, it makes it easy for those people that maybe aren't those techs that aren't as savvy with Macs to just especially with not DEP, it's not called DEP anymore, it's called Automated Device Enrollment. It makes it easy for those computers, or even if you don't have those computers, just make a script that kicks it off, and you just click a button, and away you go. So.
And I actually, coming from almost a different angle, I am that guy who sits in a chair and scripts all day. And I'm also going to highly recommend DEP Notify Starter. It actually has a ton of features, makes it a lot easier to really get set up. And that's one of the reasons that I do a lot of scripting, is that I hate doing the same thing over and over again. So being able to have a good starting point, being able to say, okay, I already know what I want to do, and having a lot of that filled out means that heavy lifting is done. But a lot of our customers, I would say mostly DEP Notify, with SplashBuddy thrown in quite a bit. A lot of the time, it's I'm sort of doing some of the magic in the background to make the things that shouldn't normally happen automatically happen automatically. And being able to sort of let the user know that that's happening is that really helps out a lot.
Well, it was the how.
Yes, how?
So the how. Well, the how right now, when I came on board with our client, we didn't even have ABM in place. So that was the first thing that I said, no, we got to get this moved over, because they're going to deprecate DEP. And once we got to that place, we were able to leverage multiple pre-stage enrollments. And all of this was all just getting ready to, setting the stage, setting the foundation. Because, at this point, again, we just have the Jamf helper image that says, don't touch this computer, blah, blah, blah. And I've had technicians who will unplug the device, move it, and it's like, why didn't it finish? Because you need to let it do its thing. All of these things, unfortunately, are how we're doing it right now, or fortunately. I don't have time to script or to research into all these really wonderful things, because unfortunately, like I'm sure a lot of you as Mac admins, you're probably the final escalation point for all the Apple things that go sideways, or that the end user or the executive thinks, why isn't it doing it this way? When it does it at home, it doesn't do it at work. So I have to really be sure that I set that expectation of this is how it works, and here's the timeline for when it's going to change. And when it changes, you will get that training, and it'll probably be from me. But yeah, that's how we're doing it right now.
At my previous company, we were using DEP Notify. I had used SplashBuddy, and at the time, it wasn't the right solution for me. It is a great solution. There are things like what Jennifer's doing. Can we talk about that?
I'm sorry?
Your games.
Oh. Yeah.
Jennifer mentioned that on SplashBuddy that she actually has some games in there for her people to play while they're
so many ideas.
waiting.
That's so great.
I
Seriously,
totally
one of
want
the
to do
coolest
that.
things I've heard.
So we had DEP Notify running, and we were evaluating actually pulling from like a raw text file of just information to provide about the company. So when you're sitting there, staring at it, it doesn't just say, we're imaging this machine, relax, grab a coffee, come back in like 10 minutes, it'll be done. But we were also doing things like we were timing to see how long that process actually took on a machine, and then going back and looking at it and seeing, can we lower this time? Can we make that faster? Because our end goal also was just to get that machine up and running for the user. And all my scripts for that are all most of it is on GitHub.
With our iOS, okay, so here's a story. We had a number of devices that were not being managed. They were iOS devices, and somebody had the bright idea of having them all share the same consumer Apple ID. And someone initiated the two-factor lock and locked all the devices. Hooray! So I worked with our person in the state next door, and Wisconsin, and I said, okay, send me the document. The document was 17 pages long that the technician had to go and tap through, and I said, okay, here's what we're gonna do. Set up the pre-stage, checked all the things, because these are essentially going to be like table reservation, single-use app type of devices. And we set up all the config profiles. I walked them through. The manager was like over the moon when we did the demo. And I gave her admin rights to the site and then put all the devices in the site. And I haven't heard from her since, but I check that site every once in a while, and all those devices are happily being activation lock disabled, and they're all working, and they're all very happy. No news is good news.
Absolutely.
Very true.
I was just going to give a little context as to what Ross was talking about. I was talking to the group about what my team has been working on, and we're using SplashBuddy, and it allows you to do your own HTML in the pane that is shown to the users. And so one of my coworkers had the idea to put HTML-based games in there. So while you are waiting for your applications to install, which is especially helpful if you're on a slow network, you have the option to play Tetris or Space Invaders.
So awesome.
So that has been very popular.
That would be hotly stolen on this panel, I would say.
You're more than welcome.
Yeah, I wanted to mention also, you mentioned the single Apple ID, and that's something I've worked with a lot of companies on and have talked them out of. Yeah, that was realizing that we needed some solution to generate Apple IDs about 6 years BDA, before device-based assignment. And yeah, that's something I've done hundreds of thousands at this point for a lot of different companies. So yeah, that's that one moment that you don't want to happen to anyone, is somebody gets a hold of that ID and locks everything else out.
Well, and in our case, it was a very innocent mistake. When we set up the new profiles, we locked everything down. And I did make one mistake. I wasn't thinking like a bad person enough. Or a teenager or whatever, insert term here. Someone had seen, so we're running Jamf 10.8. I haven't had the bandwidth to upgrade. And so someone had grabbed one of the iPads that had been recently re-provisioned and looked at the SSID and the username, and we had put that in a config profile. And so they went and tried it on their personal iPhone with the wrong password, and tried it again, and tried it again, and then locked it out, and then every other device got locked out. So we went in and removed the config profile and told our service desk to keep unlocking that particular service account. So, but on the Apple IDs, we don't even have to deal with that anymore.
I'm very glad about that.
So glad.
All right, I do have some more questions, but I'd like to open it up to the audience if anyone has any questions. Now that you know what tools everyone is using, if you have anything specific. Okay, we have a microphone coming.
Yes, run.
I use DEP Notify. I use
Is that working? Okay. I use DEP Notify too, or DEP Notify. And I was just wondering, does anybody know if Jamf has any plans of acquiring this as an integrated part of their pre-staging or enrollment, rather than us going out and seeking these splash pages and DEP Notify on our own and editing it?
I think you're going to have to bug Joel for that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say,
Yeah.
I think it's safe to say that none of
there's
us
a
are
relationship.
equipped to
Okay,
speak to Jamf's
okay.
plans.
All right, I wasn't sure if anybody was in the know.
It would be great if that happened.
I mean,
Upvote that one.
I mean, I think to your question, I think what Jamf offers right now still is the Jamf helper, and that's frustrating a lot of times because at least from my perspective, the user, all they have to do is move that window over to the side and keep working, or if they know to, Command Q, it goes away. Yeah, it'd be great if there was a tool that maybe could be optional, that we could opt in. But
It's one of the nice things about DEP Notify is you can make it full screen, unless you know the quick key commands, which I forget sometimes. But fortunately, it's right in the code, so you just look at that. And yeah, when you have something full screen there, it'd be nice if there was a game on the side, perhaps. But where the user knows that something's going on, they're being informed. Whether it's IT, maybe who doesn't have, as much experience. Even for me, I'd like to know where it is in that process, right? If it's getting hung up at a particular stage, then, that tells me something too, right? So having that, the verbose feedback on whatever level that you choose to have that on is really useful.
there's a question.
So I do have one question. First of all, I'm guessing most of you have cloud instances of Jamf in your organization. Okay, so no. So given that you don't have a cloud instance, I come from an on-prem myself, how are you dealing with the pre-stage enrollments? You can do an enrollment package and whatnot if you have a cloud instance, but right now you currently cannot do that with an on-prem. What advice might you folks give for somebody who's dealing on-prem other than upvoting Jamf and whatnot?
So I guess that's for me. So in our environment, yes, so we have an on-prem environment. And I should add that our on-prem environment is currently not externalized. So that brings in a whole other level of pain. When I brought this to the attention of my cohorts, the solution was to fix VPN. Yes, yes, facepalm. And I've had to educate and re-educate, and we're getting there. And once the upgrade is done, we're going to externalize. But to your question, what I'm doing, at least right now, is I'm leveraging configuration profiles to be loaded in the pre-stage enrollment, because I'm able to do that. And once we get to, I think we're at 10.16.1, I'm so looking forward to leveraging all of the other features that are in Jamf. As far as like packages, loading those in pre-stage, I'm gonna try to see what is possible. And I want to eventually move towards a place where the end user gets to pick and choose what they want, because we don't have any control over the end user's bandwidth. They may be at home, living in the sticks with satellite internet for all we know, and their internet is metered. Or they may be in a location where everything comes down super fast, and they may have meetings and they may have appointments. A lot of that has to do with changing the culture of the organization. So, yeah.
What I learned from the experience is,
One thing I learned from how we're doing it and whatnot, and we're definitely not doing it right. I should not be hand scripting this process, but what I have to do is during the setup assistant, I have to create a dummy admin user that gets it in, gets it logged in, gets it to the screen. We do a very vanilla setup assistant, and then we have my scripts start to take over and fire off those policies and whatnot. And that's working now, but it's awkward, and because I'm scripting it and whatnot, my scripts may not necessarily work when Apple comes out with 10.15.4 or 10.15.3 and whatnot. And that's why I'm definitely liking what I'm hearing. I mean, a lot of folks here endorsing DEP Notify. I think that's a great thing.
Well, I'll give you an example of I will call a beta or a test that I did. We have a sound design studio. We ordered half a dozen iMac Pros, and I decided, okay, I'm going to put this group over here. I'm going to give them all the new config profiles that I've set up. And we do have our setup is we have the management account that gets installed or created, and then we have what we call a first setup account, and it has a temporary password that gets cycled out after a certain number of days. And that's a whole other conversation. I want to get away from that. We have an Active Directory in our environment. We unfortunately bind our devices. But I told the main person with the Sound Design Studio okay, here's what you're going to do. When you get in, log in with your ID, elevate your privileges because I trust you, and then you're going to do the rest of the devices this way. When you're done, log out, have the user log in, and you're done. He goes, I don't need you to help me. I said, nope. If you get stuck, call me. But he never called me.
I do love when users do that.
Yeah.
For us, my old company, we were also on-prem, but zero touch was still something they really didn't embrace. So a lot of it was a technician or an admin actually still installing the machine. And so the whole not being able to use the install application of the MDM profile was really nothing that they didn't expect or didn't see. So it was set up. They could do a zero trust, but there was a mistrust in the zero trust for us, and there was a case of maybe it's going to miss something, or we ship a machine out and the machine doesn't connect back to DEP because they're not going to connect to the network on the first run or whatever. So for us, it was always just the admins doing it anyway. So there was no problem there, but once it hit the login window and it was logged in, there was a script that ran and pushed it through DEP Notify.
If you guys don't mind, I will throw one tidbit out. You mentioned that you not having the cloud instance and not being able to use the enrollment packages. I do believe you can still do it on-prem. You just need a cloud distribution point. So I don't know if that's an option for you or not, but it is kind of a halfway measure. That's unfortunate.
I wish if you guys would adopt Azure as the cloud distribution point, magically that problem would go away.
Put a feature request in.
Yep.
By a lot of people.
Okay, I think we had another question. I saw you moving.
First off, I just want to thank you guys for taking the time to speak on all your different enrollment methods. It's definitely nice to see that each and every one is, because I thought we were the only ones using SplashBuddy. We're looking at using DEP Notify along with Jamf Connect and Jamf Notify. And it's also nice to see that people are still using JSS Helper. And it's still good to see people are actually using SplashBuddy since I worked with it with Francois on it. So it's good to see that it's still being used. I actually had two questions. One is more enrollment related, another one is more offboarding. I did have a question around the newer SplashBuddy that's going to be coming out from Amaris called Ceremony. Did any of you guys see a demo of it, or were you guys looking into it at
We
all?
were talking about it before. I think that
Yeah.
that
So
you were using that more.
I got a tiny preview of it. The gentleman who did the APNS talk a couple days ago, he had it in his talk, and my understanding is it doesn't rely on so much scripting. It's less. it may be more efficient. I haven't put my hands on it, so.
I think we're talking about it's the love child between DEP Notify.
Yeah,
and
DEP Notify. It's the love child between DEP Notify and SplashBuddy. So. Yes, ceremony.
Yeah. And then the other question is around offboarding. Do you guys use any sort of offboarding method where use the built-in start OS -- erase install at all and redo the OS for DEP enrollments or anything?
No, we don't. We typically will lock the machine and have them ship it back to us, and then someone will either unlock it and push a wipe to it, so then it'll just reinstall that way, or they'll just restart from recovery, because we don't have the user's password to actually go in and deal with it, and our file vault encrypted user is the end user, so we don't have access to the actual OS.
In our environment, up until Catalina came out, we were doing internet recovery because it was very straightforward. I wanted the device to be wiped if it was flagged for being okay to be wiped, if there was like no legal hold on it kind of thing. And those steps were great, depending on which option you chose. When Catalina came out, okay, let's do the recovery partition, which is generally better, but again, because I inherited the environment, I don't know what's on those devices. I wanted a clean slate.
Quickly, for ceremony, I'm going to demo it this afternoon in the GitHub lab, so you're welcome to come.
Do we have any other questions?
Okay.
Are you guys doing anything specific during enrollment to make it more interactive? So like in another session, I saw that they were like from an Open Connect ID, they were getting like the person's name and their email address and kind of like, making IT look like magicians and, saying that we know who you are, welcome to the company, and kind of personalized. So the HTML games will definitely be looking at something like that just to make it more, someone will want enrollment to last longer, not be shorter. Is there anything else you guys do at the other places that makes them more interactive for the user, or does something additional during enrollment?
With DEP Notify Starter, it's, even though it's pretty basic, you can also extend it quite a bit. So, for example, we're not doing it at the moment, but I could just as easily extend that to just a little bit of scripting, like. And you can say, if you choose a particular department, so we're K-12, for example, if you chose to a particular school, then it would, based on those feedback statements, you could deploy different apps. You could extend that to the next screen and have different elements there. Might take a little bit more programming experience, but all the framework's really there. So building upon that is a lot easier than starting from scratch or just starting with the basic framework of DEP Notify by itself. So for our standpoint, if I was to extend that further, that's where I would go. We're not doing that currently because I was given time to get everything set up, but I'm given limited time to maintain the environment. So I kind of wear a lot of hats in that respect. So being able to invest that time and troubleshoot issues like that is just not an option for me at the moment. So really using tools that free my time up and so I don't have to go back and maintain it on a consistent basis is really something that interests me. So being able to deploy a tool like DEP Notify or with DEP Starter to make it a little bit easier is really something that interests me. But some of these other guys might have some different.
Yeah, I'll just throw in. I love the you mentioned having the user's name in the actual workflow. That's definitely something I'm a big fan of getting inventory preload done when that's logistically possible, to be able to match up the user to the machine before it even reaches their hands. So that way they open it up and they actually see, hi Joe, we're getting your Mac ready for you. It's little touches, but it is that same idea of personalization of IT, breaking down that barrier between the people that just tell you you can't do something versus the ones that actually enable you to do it.
I think one of the biggest challenges that we all have is that we have tools that are not off the shelf. They're frameworks, they're homegrown, and we're trying to make these tools so open-ended so that they can fit any number of scenarios that we all deal with. And some of those scenarios are companies, enterprises, schools that are constrained by budget or progress or policies. So that's where I think we all collectively have challenges, because I've seen some really amazing things here this week, and I'm thinking, where am I going to get the time to do that? But to the super easy built-in things that we can leverage, that is definitely, that's going to help us in the long run, but not just us, but our entire support team. That's the goal I'm heading towards.
Have you guys run into any specific problems associated with refreshing computers using your enrollment policies, including moving user data or things like that?
Yeah, so we don't use Migration Wizard. I've found there's been stability issues where sometimes the data doesn't even move, or the machine just starts crashing after it. There are a couple tools out there. Someone wrote one for target disk mode that was kind of the same thing. You ran a script, and I've been kind of playing with that one to use that, but a lot of it was just copying over the home folder manually, because that's really all they wanted, and just say install your apps again. Most people are pretty okay with the fact that they get to reinstall their apps, because they're like, oh, well, it's my turn to clean my machine that I've had for 3 or 4 years, so okay, cool.
I'm kind of in the same boat of, I'd rather have users have their apps reinstalled. There's nothing worse than having a technician move over Photoshop 2012, or if that even exists, I don't know. Like multiple versions of applications, all the junk that comes with that. But again, a lot of that comes back to setting the expectation with the end users, setting the expectation with your management, and making them understand that, yes, we have creatives that are working with these tools, but they also need to grow with the product. And I know that's sometimes not always possible, but it's manual.
We don't really do too much with backing up user data. We rely on Microsoft OneDrive. We have lots of students, teachers know about OneDrive, so backing information up is something we got to look into, perhaps. I hear code for 42 might be good, but anyways, that's something we definitely got to look into further. But we rely heavily on self-service. So again, that whole thing about spending the time and targeting particular computers with particular images. We really have a base image that we deploy across machines. So with 1013 and beyond, it's very easy to kickstart an erase and install with that. That's probably a whole nother topic on how to do that. But you can do that, and as long as it has automated device enrollment, you can then re-image that computer. If you have Zero Touch all installed and ready to go, then it's a very easy thing to do. Leveraging self-service, they can get all their apps back up, and with a tool, whether it be Microsoft OneDrive or another maybe cloud service, they can easily get their data back as well. So that's our workflow for that at the moment. I know it could use some fleshing out and some improvements, but with the limited time that I have to dedicate to it, that's what we do at the moment.
And I'll actually echo that. You're not alone there. A lot of companies, when it comes to user data, it's the policy is if it's not on our approved cloud storage, then it doesn't really matter what happens to it. But in reality, it usually does. So I'd like to see a shift change at some point in companies realizing that data can live in different places. I think bandwidth is always going to be a concern of really bringing all that back. But and also there's always 143 copies of Firefox.dmg in the downloads folder. And self-service helps with that too.
I mean, a challenge that I had at my previous employer was when we were doing in-place upgrades, and this was circa 2015, 2016. I was tasked with the lovely task of scheduling about 1,500 laptop users to back up their data, decrypt their machine because they installed PGP on them. I know. Wipe the device, re-image, put the data back on. But for all the devices that didn't have PGP, the concept of in-place upgrades was like, what's that? And one of the things that I said, at the beginning of the process was, look, we need to set up some kind of automated backup here, because even though it's an in-place upgrade, if something goes sideways, we need that backup just to, as our insurance policy. And we set up with some help, some fellow Mac admins in the Mac admin community. We set up an rsync script to some servers that, just for data. And we do the first backup, and then we do a supplemental the night of, and then we do the in-place upgrade. And we upgraded about 3,000 devices that way. We did have a hiccup with the East Coast where we upgraded a scanner system, and it created a P1 call, and finally the incident manager said, was any data lost? I said, no, it's an in-place upgrade. We have a backup. He goes, okay, we're done with this call. It was like, okay. I think that's something that's really challenging for us, is the backup piece.
Okay, I think we're almost out of time. Did we have another question?
Yeah, just quickly. So one of the things that we deal with in my environment is we only have our last 2 years of purchases on Apple School Manager. So we have a lot of computers that we need an alternate workflow to get those computers ready, which requires the user-approved MDM to be approved in the profiles. Is that something that you guys deal with? I know that we use a tool called UMAD to deal with that, but I just didn't know if there were any other people that were dealing with that, or if any of you were.
That is a good question. I will say that user-approved MDM, I think, is kind of one of the bigger hangups for anything that hasn't gone through the or can be brought back through the DEP/Apple Business Manager process. I will say there have been a lot of situations where I've had guide scripts, things that at least tell someone how to get through it. If it's an old enough version of the operating system, anything can be automated if you try hard enough. But yeah, that's sort of, I don't have a great answer to that. It is a very good question, though.
In our environment, we have a smart group set up that tells us every single device that has that, and luckily that number is very low now. It was very high when I first came on board. And we had a policy, a written policy that all of support knew. So previous to working in corporate America, I worked in a school system for about 10 years. So I understand the constraints that you have with staff and students and volunteers and school policies, et cetera, and budget constraints. So what I would approach your administration and find out if there's some kind of messaging that you can get out on a regular basis, or maybe, I'm not sure if you have assistants in those classrooms that can be informed, and it's a click. So a lot of it is just information, getting the word out that this is what you need to do and this is how you need to do it. And if they ask why, they can certainly ask. You can certainly tell them. But yeah, it's kind of a manual thing. Sorry.
All right, well, I think that about does it for time. Thank you all for coming, and thank you for your questions, and thank you to all of our panelists for participating.
Thank you.